how to get rich, and more importantly, stay rich.
It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
Yeah, Brian, I'm really excited about this show because, we have a little saying when we talk to financial planning clients. We talk about making good financial decisions. We always tell them, it's not always about how much money you make. It's about how much money you keep. Well, I like that this show is kind of in that same vein because this one is not going to be about how do you get wealthy, but how do you stay wealthy for the long term?
Yeah, well, we're going to take them on a journey. We're going to talk about what we've learned from our experience on what does actually create wealth. But then more importantly, and then we're going to spend a lot of focus on how do you stay wealthy? Because that is something, I think it's very interesting that you have two skill sets. A lot of people think these things are related, but it's actually two separate skill sets. One requires you to take risk, to build wealth over time, and another one is going to have you mitigate that risk so that you actually stay in the game and actually keep the wealth. So we're going to kind of cover the basics and make sure you're prepared either way. But first, let's kind of talk about a current state of how things actually are right now, because America, when I use the word wealth, we know that's not the majority of the folks.
That's exactly right. We actually don't have a wealth problem here in the United States. We have a lack of wealth problem when you think about the statistic that 61% of Americans right now have less than $1,000 in savings. So if there were an emergency, if there were a major event, a medical bill, or the HVAC goes out, or a car accident, most folks don't even have $1,000 to be able to cover that emergency.
Now, this was a big, exciting update for me and Daniel because I've had him working daily to go see if Bankrate had updated this information. And I'm sad to say we actually had a decrease, meaning that instead of 60% of Americans not being able to come up with $1,000, now it's 61%. So unfortunately, it looks like we're going a little
It's getting
backwards.
a little worse, yeah.
So, but let's go with some good news that actually has a cutting dark side to it. And the second thing is that 80% of millionaires are actually first generation. But is that the perception?
It's not the perception at all. We actually found from Everyday Millionaires as well as our own internal Money Guy Wealth survey that 74% of millennials believe that most millionaires inherited their wealth. They think if in order to be wealthy, you basically had to have been born wealthy. And then 52% of boomers believe the same, that in order to be wealthy, you had to have been born wealthy.
So that's kind of a limiting belief there. If you're putting that the system is against you, that you're not going to be wealthy because only people wealthy are people who are born with the silver spoon, that is probably going to put up some limitations, some obstacles. It's going to have your brain, instead of this invisible hand helping you build success, it's going to have you thinking, hey, I can't do this.
That's exactly right. And what we found is that perception is not actually reality. In the reality, according to the Money Guy Wealth survey, only about 11% of our wealthy financial planning clients inherited over $100,000. There are about 12% that inherited some money, but it was less than $100,000. And the vast majority, 77% of our wealthy clients, wealthy Money Guy listeners, did not inherit anything. They inherited nothing. So the wealth that they've been able to build was all in the first generation. It was all done by themselves.
Well, and then I'll take this a step further because we know the research shows, look, if 80%, close to 80% of people are first generation, that means there must be a pretty good amount of turnover that's actually going on, that we have this much opportunity,
That's
that
right.
80% of successful people are the first generation. And this is what we found. 70% of wealthy families lose their wealth by the second generation.
No, that's heartbreaking to me because it takes an entire lifetime to build up this wealth. And then 70% of second generation burn through that, have nothing to show for it after one additional lifetime.
And then fast forward to the third generation, 90%.
Even more harrowing.
And that ties in nicely to that stat of 80% are first generation. You see how this is a cleansing cycle where wealth just doesn't stick around. That's why I always tell people, if you're really troubled by the system, just hang on because it's constantly evolving and changing. You know, and I've even seen data where if you look at, Forbes 400, the richest people in the United States, every decade on average, that turns over well over 20% every decade.
So we're not just talking about like millionaires, we're talking about like the wealthiest of the wealthy, the creme de la creme. Even in that echelon, there is a ton of turnover.
So as you can see, there is obviously a disconnect from getting wealthy to staying wealthy. So that's why we talk a lot about on our show how do you make sure you're protecting yourself? This is not only helping you build wealth, but also making sure you have the right worldview, the right perspective to really make sure you don't fall into some trap that locks you into a bad situation.
So if we want to talk about how to stay wealthy, the first thing we have to figure is, how does one get wealthy? How do you go about getting rich? How do you go about becoming wealthy?
Now, this brings up some good memories because we've done a show in the past and we talked about the 4 paths to wealth. And I thought the first one, and I think it's very appropriate, is the virtuoso.
Yep.
Now, look, we have JT there in the background, as you can see, wearing a fly outfit, if I can say. Here's the thing about JT. The man can dance. He's athletic. He's musically talented.
He's a pretty decent actor.
I think that God got caught in another conversation while he was shaking the salt shaker of talents, and he kind of got a little extra on JT. But that's what that's a small percentage of what is wealth. And by the way, when I talk about wealth in this terms, we're talking about somebody who has both income of $160,000 a year and a net worth of $3.2 million in assets. That's a decent chunk of money.
And I think most people, when they think of wealthy folks, they think of virtuosos. These are the actors, celebrities, musicians, athletes, but really only 7% of folks fall into this category.
Yeah, so then the next one people think of, because this is the executive fat cat. This is the big company executive. This is the people that are working for the public companies, titans of industry. But once again, this is not as big as most people would probably realize, because this is only 18% of the wealthy are senior executives.
And then the third category, the third path, are the dreamers, the entrepreneurs, those folks that start a business or create something to make money. They're the ones that come up with an idea and are able to sell that idea or produce that idea.
Yeah, now this one does make sense to me, because we've, if you read any book like Millionaire Next Door, Everyday Millionaires, when they talk about the profiles of what is success and how did people build their wealth, it's not uncommon that you have a lot of small business owners. This is where it could be the heat and air company in your town. It could be the plumber. It could be the small business owner, the architect, the accountant. There's all kind of paths that a small business owner has to build wealth. And by the way, I think it's also, as we get these bigger numbers like the entrepreneurs and dreamers of 51%, it is possible to be in multiple quadrants of this wealth creation, meaning that it is possible for that virtuoso to have also started companies. Like, I guarantee you, if we're talking about JT, the man has some businesses too, and he's got some employees. So it is possible to kind of slip into several boxes. And that leads to our final box,
the saver and investor. I think this one is probably the most exciting one, because this one is available, in my opinion, to everyone. Maybe you weren't born with the skills to be a virtuoso, or maybe you didn't have the right, perfect mix to be able to work your way up the executive ladder. Maybe you don't have the risk appetite to go out there and start a business and go out on your own. But all of us have the capacity to be a saver, to take a little bit of today and trade it in for a great, big, beautiful tomorrow. And what I love is 49% of wealthy folks said this is the way that they got to wealth. This is the way that they were able to build their assets.
Yeah, so next to the small business owners, this is the next biggest way. And we've seen this when you read Chris Hogan's book. He talks about the largest share of millionaires actually cross 7-figure status with their employer retirement plan. So if you just can start young and harness the 3 components of wealth creation, which is discipline, money, and then time, this thing, it kind of works for itself. It's a little shake and bake for dollar cost averaging and letting your army of dollar bills work for you.
Now, if you're someone out there and you're saying, okay, I fall in that camp, I'm a saver and investor, but I want to, I fall in there, I want to make sure I'm doing the things right. We have a fantastic deliverable available for you on our website. Go to moneyguy.com/resources, and we actually have our financial order of operations, where if you want to kind of have an instruction manual for your dollars, all right, I want to save and investing, where do I put my next dollar? This manual will kind of walk you through our 9 tried and true steps towards building wealth. So if you haven't had a chance to check that out, make sure you go do that.
Yeah, it really is an instruction manual for money. And then this was something I think it's worth sharing that we also talk about 88 times over. We talk about the power of every dollar in your army and what the opportunity or incremental chance that it has of becoming something bigger, better. That's that taking a little bit today for that great, big, beautiful tomorrow. Tell them, go download this too. It's moneyguy.com/resources. What's this titled again? So when they're looking for it?
This is How Powerful Are Your Dollars? And we have two versions of it. We have the Young Money Millionaire version that shows you how powerful your dollars are from age 0 to 35. And then we have the, I don't want to say older, but we have the more mature version that shows you age 20 all the way out to age 65. So you can see just how powerful your army of dollars can be. What I think is beautiful are the folks that fall into that saver and investor category. They have figured this out. They understand the financial order of operations, and they're taking the steps necessary to move in that direction.
So, and then, of course, I feel like we need to plug past shows more because a lot of you guys, now that we're starting to get a little size to us, now that we're over 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, you need to go check out some of our older shows that were just as good on content. We just were a little more undiscovered at that point. And this is one. And notice, JT, I inspired him. I got the same fly outfit he does. But this is how rich people get rich. The secrets revealed. We go through all 4 of these types if you want to see a deeper dive on this subject matter.
Okay, so we've kind of walked through, that's how you get rich. There are really 4 paths to becoming wealthy. Well, then the next immediate question you might have is, all right, well, how do rich people end up losing their wealth? What is it that wealthy people do that causes their wealth to disappear, to evaporate?
Well, I think a lot of it, rich people fall into a lot of the same traps that even normal people do. Is that, the first thing I think of is lack of discipline in consumption. There is something about being fearful that the money will go away. I think that actually sharpens the blade of if you can be frugal with how you handle your money, even in abundance, I think you will be better prepared to keep that wealth. That's the problem. Is I think a lot of people get overconfidence and they start just thinking, hey, I can do this, I can spend, I can buy. It will all work out, and that can be a very scary thing.
Now, one of the common traits that we see around wealthy people is a lot of times they tend to be higher income. That's just kind of maybe they have a skill set that got them in there. And what we've recognized is there's a difference in rich, what we would call rich, and there's a difference in wealthy. There's a difference in being income statement affluent and being actually affluent, being balance sheet affluent.
Yeah, rich people, just because you make a good income, you might be rich, but you're not wealthy.
You're not wealthy.
And that's the part that I think a lot of people don't realize is wealth is actually invisible. You know where wealth is? Wealth is actually in owning assets. It's your army of dollar bills that are working behind the scenes. That's not as sexy and cool as rich and going and buying the baller house, the baller car. And I think that's where you see a lot of people really get into a problem, is that they haven't caught on to the fact that your goal is, if you have a big shovel and a big income, your goal is to turn that into actual wealth so your dollars keep working for you, so your wealth continues to expand, so you can work less with your hands, your back, your brains. If you're rich only in income, it can go away tomorrow if you quit making that big income.
And what I think a lot of people do is rather than recognizing they need to turn that income into assets, they do lack this discipline in consumption. They begin to have that insatiable appetite of wanting something bigger and nicer and more and better. And we can even see that sort of in behavioral economics. We know that the average auto loan term for new cars is 72 months.
Yeah,
the average loan, if you think about how long, most people don't even drive cars for 72 months. So it's kind of remarkable that that's the average car loan. And we know that 1 in 3 folks who trade in a vehicle are underwater on their auto loan, meaning that when they trade it in, they owe more than it's worth. They end up rolling that negative equity into the value of the new loan.
Yeah, and that leads to, I think, how do we get in this type of trap? I think a lot of people, and it's not just wealthy people or rich people, I should say, because they're not wealthy yet. But I think a lot of people fall in the trap of not knowing their why, and they expect money. They don't realize it's a tool. They think it's a goal that, hey, I want to be rich. I want to have this money flowing in. And they get themselves in a situation where they really fall prey to this whole hedonic treadmill.
That's right.
And now look, this is a good thing if you were injured, disabled, or something. As humans, we're pretty resilient, meaning that if you have a bunch of bad stuff happen to you all at once, like you lose your job, you become disabled, or other things, fortunately for us humans, we adapt nicely, very quickly, and reach another status quo or equilibrium. Well, it works the other way also, even with good stuff. Like you come into wealth and riches or a lot of income, you could keep buying cars, houses, planes. It doesn't matter. Fast forward 6 months, you will just look at that beautiful house. You'll look at that beautiful car and be like, yeah, I own that.
Yep, that's
whatever.
my house. It's just another house.
It's amazing the appetite that the human condition has to just absorb what you're buying, and then you'll get used to it too, and that's a problem. So since that's already built into our condition, it's better to recognize and know that, look, just the journey of becoming wealthy or rich, I should say, is not going to actually bring you fulfillment.
So, okay, the first thing is lack of discipline and consumption. We think that the second reason that rich or wealthy people end up losing their wealth is failure to plan. Now, I am reminded, we all have those sayings, and I've said this before, that our parents said to us that stuck in our mind, and we're like, oh, Mom, oh, Dad. Well, this is one for me because my mom used to always say to me, failing to plan is planning to fail. And that is like the most cliche, most silly thing out there. Yet, it is so true. There's so much truth in the fact that if you don't have a plan in place, it is very easy to get off course and completely lose sight of what you're moving towards.
You're that rudderless ship. I mean, there is so many. That's why do we talk about, when we're talking about wealth creation, wealth building, we're always talking about a roadmap. We're talking about having a navigation plan. You know, it's not uncommon to hear a financial planner has called their stuff the navigator. All these analogies are made is because they want you to understand the similarities between when you're on a journey, you want to be purposeful and know your why, begin with the end in mind. All those things will keep you on track, because if you do not plan for the future, you're just kind of floating around, drifting, and you get yourself in a lot of opportunities that potentially could go very bad.
Absolutely. And then I think the third thing that we see often happen is overconfidence. Folks who have success or they have some sort of financial resources tend to fall into this overconfidence. And I'll tell you where I see this a lot is where folks end up getting lucky, right? You know, Brian, you and I, earlier on in our careers, well, it was earlier in my career. I'm not going to give you an excuse. I had started studying for the CFA exam, right? And I came up with, I was learning all about investments, and I said, Brian, I got this great idea. We ought to start trading options. I just learned about options. Makes me an options genius. Makes me able to go out and do that. I said, hey, why don't we take some money and let's go buy some call options on this company that's changing the way people use cell phones, is what I'll say. And you're like, yeah, let's do it. I'm in. And the worst thing that is possibly imaginable happened.
We made money.
We made money. We were successful the very first time out of the gate. So naturally, what did we decide? Oh, we got this.
we
know what we're doing.
We thought that we had a very viable system at this point.
And unfortunately, that was not the case.
I think there's another analogy. I've read The Psychology of Money, Morgan Housel. He has a great book if y'all haven't checked it out. He has a great example in there about Berkshire Hathaway. And this is something that just shook me, because I thought I knew most things about the Oracle from Omaha, Warren Buffett, and Berkshire Hathaway, Charlie Munger. And here's what I didn't know. There was a third partner at Berkshire Hathaway.
Because when I think of Berkshire, I think of Warren and Charlie. Those are the only two I think about.
His name was Rick Guerin. It was, Charlie, Rick, and Warren.
Okay.
They actually were at Berkshire together. And this is the way Warren was eventually asked about this. Somebody asked him, hey, I thought there was a third member. Can you talk about Rick? What happened to Rick? And here's what Warren shared about it. He said, look, Charlie and myself always knew we were going to be wealthy. We just were our skill set, our behaviors, but we weren't in a hurry to get to our wealth. We knew what worked. We were slow and steady with the process. We knew time, because really he's kind of giving a nod towards those three components of wealth: the discipline, the money, the time. Warren definitely knows these things. He had it figured out
early on.
He had it figured out. He's doing those behaviors. He said, here's what I can tell you about Rick. Rick was in a hurry to get to his wealth. So what did he do? He was using leveraged debt. He was using margin debt on his investments. And then in 1973, 1974, the stock market got crushed. Rick got caught swimming naked, essentially, because he didn't have the assets. He had overconfidence. It's just like you and I playing around with the stock options and other things. And guess what? Warren Buffett bought Rick's shares for less than $40 a share. And if you guys know, Berkshire Hathaway is one of those type of holdings. He doesn't issue dividends. It doesn't split. So, I mean, it's always valued multiple six figures. So to buy it for less than $40, you can see that's why we've never heard of Rick. So Rick suffered from, he took too much risk, had too much overconfidence. And that's what we're going to talk about, right? We're going to transition into how to make sure you save the money. But it is one of those things, you can take too much risk for the actual reward. Your goal is, hey, I'm trying to build all this wealth, but you could really get yourself in a pickle of a situation.
And you forget to do, or you choose not to do, the boring things. We hear this all the time. Hey, guys, I make tons of money. I'm fine. I don't need an emergency fund. I don't need to keep that cash. Cash is earning nothing right now. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to go invest. I'm going to go buy real estate. I'm going to go do all these things. Well, if we could plan for the catastrophes, if we knew that emergencies were going to happen, we'd all avoid them. The unfortunate thing is we don't know when they are going to happen. That's why the financial order of operations, making sure you're following the step-by-step, makes so much sense. And I think a lot of the reason that wealthy people fall out of wealth is just because of that. They get it out of order. They get overconfident. And they don't dance with the one that got them there.
So let's talk about, well, if we've kind of set it up, well, how they lose their money. How do you actually protect your money? Let's actually put some skill to this so that others out there don't make these same mistakes. And even if you're not affluent yet, or if you're not wealthy yet, these skill sets are things you should start practicing right now that will definitely, on your journey to building wealth, financial independence, this will serve you very, very well.
So number one we said is create and stress test a great retirement plan. Now, you may be sitting out there, you may be thinking, oh, well, I'm a 25-year-old and I'm not even thinking about retirement. It's way out there. You realize that when you're in your early part of your career, when you're in your 20s and your 30s, your retirement plan is your savings rate.
Yeah.
If you're one of those people saying, oh, I'm just going to wait until I get to my 30s and 40s, then I'll get serious about it, you are blowing your retirement. Your retirement plan needs to be, how aggressively am I adding to my army of dollar bills? Now, for you folks that are a little bit longer in the tooth and retirement is on the horizon and that landing strip is coming up on you, this is where you better make sure that you stress test your retirement plan to make sure you factored all the contingencies that could potentially come into your life.
Now, we do this for all of our clients that are approaching retirement, in retirement. We use software to figure out what their probability of success is. And here's what I think is interesting, is our entire goal for this is if we can raise the odds of success, it creates a margin of safety.
That's right.
The likelihood of success is protected. And remember, this is the goal. It's one thing to build wealth. It's another thing to keep wealth so you don't repeat that horrible cleansing cycle where wealth evaporates over the generations. This is a big part of it. And we do this for all the clients. We do these Monte Carlo simulations, thousands and thousands of kind of stacking up different years, good years with bad years, so you don't run into, I go into retirement without knowing what my probability of actually reaching my goals is.
Yeah, one of the things I see, and this is such a fallacy that we see out there, is someone will say, hey, you know, I've heard the 4% rule, and I'm going to save up until I have $1 million, and I know that I can live off of $40,000 a year, so I am going to be locked in. Well, one of the things that we do when we run these Monte Carlo analysis, when we do these retirement scenarios, say, hey, if you may think that 40,000 is right, but what if something happens and healthcare costs more? Or what if you have a big expense? And what if your spending is actually $55,000, $60,000 a year? Can your plan sustain that? Do you have enough slack in the system? And oftentimes we find that people don't. And we have to say, hey, you know, what you thought was the right number is not the right number, because if one or two of these bad things happen, boom, you're all the way back to cat food hamburger patties.
Well, I think that people who have success, sometimes we talked about it earlier, they have overconfidence. They just, and look, we hear about people, you write us, I see you on the comments, you say, hey guys, if I have 6 months of cash reserves, what's wrong if I have 100%
we hear that all the time.
in the stock market? Who cares? And what I'm telling you, look, I get it. Cash is so unsexy. Cash doesn't earn much money. But if you can have the right asset allocation, diversification of assets that are risky versus non-risky, and some of that is in cash, some of that's in bonds and other things, what that is doing for you, a risk-adjusted return, is making sure you can survive whatever volatility comes your way. And that's the big part that I think when people look at cash and they go, man, I see that the banks are only paying, the online banks are only paying 0.5%. I'm going to keep my money in that total stock market index because last year it made, 15%. What they don't talk about is what happens in that 20% of the time when it doesn't perform well. And that kind of brings me to, let's just talk about wealth creation in general through market economies. And I talk about this all the time. And Bo, we have a slide where we talk about investing is like walking up a mountain with a yo-yo.
Yep, and this is
what Daniel put together.
Specialty.
And here's what I mean by that is that here's what's so awesome about innovation, wealth creation. I think there is not a better time to be an investor.
Yep.
And what I mean by that is that we live in a time that we have exponential growth opportunities. And what I mean by that is look at how fast technology is changing the world. I mean, even in my lifetime, I have watched us go from, home computer or big institutional computers to home computers to iPhones to
watches.
Watches. I mean, this thing, medical, we're creating vaccines in less than a year now. Things are, it's moving at a very fast pace, and we're going to find ways to profit off of that. But in this process of creating wealth and creating opportunity, there's always going to be crazy stuff that's not accounted for. I mean, I think about my life. I came out of college in the mid-90s. What I have seen in my life is the dot-com bubble. So you have the dot-com bubble, then you have 9/11, where we had the huge terrorist attack. You think about the Great Recession with the housing bust, and then think about last year with a pandemic. And the thing is, nobody will ever predict what's next. Nobody can predict what's going on. But if you can understand, investing is walking up that mountain with a yo-yo, because as you're doing the yo-yo, it's going up and down in the short term. But as you're walking up that mountain over the long term, it keeps going higher and higher. You're getting on higher ground. So it doesn't matter what's going on in the short term. And it also keeps you from focusing on the emotional, pessimistic type things that can happen that blow up the world we all live in while we're still in this great big awesome opportunity. It's just you have to have a long-term view, be an optimist to see through the kind of the craziness that we all live in.
I love it. So the first way that you protect your wealth is you create and stress test a great retirement plan. The second way we think you can really protect your wealth over the long term is watch out for lifestyle creep. You've heard us talk about this before, but essentially, as we have more success, just because we can do things doesn't mean that we necessarily need to do things. Because I can afford the more expensive car or the more expensive house or the more expensive neighborhood or the nicer clothes or the nicer things doesn't mean that I should. I need to have a why that is around the decisions I'm making.
I've used this analogy a bunch, but I think it's worth paying attention to, because every time I've moved higher up in lifestyle, there's unintended cost.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, let's go through a few of these. You buy the nicer luxury car, guess what? It requires premium fuel.
Oh, it's the worst.
Guess what?
How about oil changes?
Oil changes cost more because now you're getting synthetic oil. You probably have to go to the dealership. The tires, because they're going to probably be low profile, are going to be more expensive. Your insurance is going to be more expensive. Same thing happens. You buy a nicer house.
Yep.
Let me go ahead and tell you, the landscape crew, if you outsource it, is going to charge you more. All repairs are going to charge you more. Each time you move up to a nicer house, the
utilities are going to be more.
Jinx. Utilities, insurance costs, decorations, because the bigger your square footage, the more furniture. It is amazing how, there's a reason you have the rap song, Mo Money, Mo Problems.
Yep.
I mean, you think about it, it's true. I mean, life just kind of happens. So when you have this lifestyle creep, it really can take away your happiness factor. And that's the part is I see people, there's always going to be somebody who has more money than you. So you better figure out your why, know what makes you happy. So you quit swimming upstream, quit changing the goalpost, because you can keep buying more and more and more. And I tell you what, it's probably not going to make you any happier than you were when you reached that first successful house, car that just brought you the food, the shelter, and the transportation that got you where you needed to be.
So one of the things I think you can do, every year we talk about you ought to do a net worth statement. We think that this is like Christmas morning. Brian and I, we high five and celebrate every time we do it. One of the things you want to do, if you want to set yourself up to avoid lifestyle creep, right now where you are, think about, okay, this is the level, the standard of living I want to achieve. I want to, live in this kind of house and drive this kind of car and have this kind of freedom and travel this way. and go ahead and set that in stone, and maybe even just write it on the bottom of your net worth statement. And as you're working, work towards that. But once you hit it, remember that that's what you said was your dream. And don't try to keep expanding your dream. Don't try to keep chasing. Pick the level you want to live at and work to get there, but don't try to go past that if that's where you're ultimately going to be happy, because then you're chasing something, just like you said, Brian, it's not going to be very fulfilling at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's just more stuff. And I think that's what I find interesting. I talk to a lot of my friends because we're all getting to be in our upper 40s. And I hear it from my successful friends. I just want my life simpler. I just want my life simpler. And I think there's something to be said about that, because when you're younger, you're thinking bigger, better, faster, stronger.
Yep.
And then you get older and you realize, man, no, you know what I want? I want simplicity. I want to just enjoy my life, and I want to do what I want, when I want, and how I want.
Love it.
That's something that takes a little maturity to kind of get to that point.
The third way that we say you ought to protect your wealth is that you have a healthy relationship with debt. Now, I think this one is a really funny one, because when you're first starting out, you tell the story, Brian, when you were in college, like 150 years ago, all it took was like a bag of potato chips and people would sign up to get a credit card, right? Well, what's funny is as you have some success, as you have some wealth, as you build, it's amazing that those lending institutions are willing to let you borrow more and more. Like, you can only do so much damage when you're like a broke college kid, but as you do start to build wealth, it's amazing that the bank says, hey, you know what? I'll let you borrow this. Or how much house can you afford? Oh, you can afford this much house. Yeah. They are very quick to let you know how much debt you can use. But again, just because you can doesn't mean that you should.
Well, and I think you have to have the healthy relationship with debt, because I think debt, look, when you're in your 20s and 30s, you're going to love that we have this thing called mortgages that lets you buy that first beautiful house, that lets you raise your family. That's a good thing, but there is too much of a good thing, because instead of it being a tool to help enable you to get your first house, they will. I will tell you, I was surprised when I was building this house up here in Franklin, Tennessee. The lender, after she ran my credit score, she was like, we can do 100% financing. I
was like, what?
No. This is what got us into 2008, 9 and 10 and 11. And we're not. No, I'm putting down the 20%. Because yes, just because I can doesn't mean I should. And this is why I think we get a bad rap, Bo, is because I want younger people. While you're young, you have the army of dollar bills, you have the exponential growth. I do want you to be careful don't pay down the 2.5% mortgage so fast. I want you to focus on growing the family, growing the army of dollar bills, the Roth IRAs, the employer plans. Focus on those things. But I do think when you get to be my age, in your mid-40s and on, let's just get all the debt paid off. You shouldn't owe anybody anything, because are you truly financially independent when you have encumbrances? And that's what, if you have debt, you are encumbered to continue to pay future payments to somebody else. We want to stop that. Now, look, I know we can get in the argument about property taxes and other things, but I don't want you to have any debt payments once you get to financial independence.
But maybe you're trying to think about, well, I'm not quite at financial independence yet, so how should I think about developing that healthy relationship with debt? Are there some rules of thumb that I can follow? And yes, there are some rules of thumbs that you can follow.
We have the 4 quadrants of debt.
These are the 4 quadrants. First of all, credit card debt is a no-go. Absolutely not. No way, no how. Don't do it. Now, you notice it doesn't say credit card usage. Yeah. We are perfectly fine if you want to use credit cards so long as you can do it responsibly. But if you are one of those people that feels that you can't, or that finds that you cannot pay it off every single month and not carry a balance, then it should be no-go land for you, because credit card debt is an absolute no-go.
And then think about this, student loan debt.
It's a big one today.
Student loans, if you're using it to go get it better yourself, it can be a very positive thing. But it seems like more and more I'm starting to see student loan interest rates that are high. They're somewhat predatory. Now we're fortunately in a reprieve right now because of the pandemic, but just be very aware, guys. I don't want you running up a bunch of debt for college. If you should not, first rule of thumb is don't have more student debt than your first year anticipated salary out of college. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, if you already have the debt, here's how you ought to prioritize paying it off. If it's less than 6%, if you're 20 to 29, kind of don't get in a fast hurry, because that money might be better used somewhere else, like employer match, Roth IRAs. 30 to 39, 5%. You can
Love it.
see what happens. It drops down 40 to 49, 4%. And then if you're over 50 and got student loan debt, get rid of
Get
it. You
it
shouldn't
gone.
have any debt as you're approaching financial independence. And then, Bo, we even have some guidance on cars.
Yeah, so for auto loans, our first rule of thumb is that the amount that you're saving on a monthly basis must be greater than your auto loan payment.
No doubt.
You have to have more going into investments than you have going to your auto payment, or you're doing it wrong. Once you get past that, we want you to follow 23-8, where if you're going to buy a car, new or used, you put 20% down, you don't finance for any more than 3 years or 36 months, and your auto payment cannot exceed 8% of your monthly gross income.
And then what about luxury cars?
And then luxury cars have a little asterisk. You have to pay them off in a year. You don't get the 3 years for luxury cars. You have to pay them off in 12 months. But, Bo, what if I can't pay off a luxury car inside of 12 months? Well, I would argue you can't afford the luxury car. Go get something more affordable.
Yeah, we're trying to make sure you don't get all excited about looking cool, but you really can't afford it. This will hopefully give you the guidance so you don't fake life. And
That's
it's
right.
the same thing. Another big trap we see, housing
huge
expenses,
one.
whether it's rent, whether it's mortgages. We want that to stay less than 25% of your gross income. If you can keep all these rules about debt and have that healthy relationship, I'm telling you, it lets you build that excess margin in there so you can pay yourself first, let your army of dollar bills grow, and you can remain and stay wealthy and hopefully not have the issues with losing it in the second and third generation.
Okay, so we said that if we're protecting our wealth, obviously we want to create and stress test a really good retirement plan. We want to make sure we don't fall prey to lifestyle creep. We want to make sure we don't allow our debt to let us fall prey to that lifestyle creep. And the fourth thing is we ought to teach our kids about smart financial principles.
Yeah, I mean, we heard the first intro section. I said, look, 80% of wealth is first generation. But the sad part of that statistic is by second generation, 70% of the wealth is gone. By third generation, the grandkids, 90% of the families lose it all. So that's a scary, scary thing. I tell you, a good way to get to a solution on that, let's go ahead and start teaching some valuable skills to our younger generation. You know, be very forthright with what the value of a dollar is, the importance of saving and investing, paying yourself first, being generous. All these things can really build a lot of skill sets.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we really can think about is starting early is not bad. You know, I have my oldest daughter's 5 years old. She lost her third tooth today, Brian. And I don't know who set this up, but I think when she lost her first tooth, she got $1 from the tooth fairy. When she lost her second tooth, she got $2. Well, I don't know who told her this is the way that it works, but she said, Daddy, 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 guess what? And I said, what, baby? She goes, I bet I'm going to get $3. And I said, well, $3.
Man, by the time this child gets to her last teeth, it's good. We got an exponential growth thing here.
Speaking of cash out refi, but here's what I think is interesting. I'm hoping that what she's thinking is you know what? It's time for me to have my next daddy-daughter date where we're going to talk about what to do with the money. And if I can instill those principles in her early on, it's going to save not only my wealth later in life, it's going to set her up to build her own wealth later in life as well. But that's not just us that have come up with that. We've actually seen this in other resources that we respect out there.
Well, and I'm hopeful because one of the things and I've talked about this on quite a few shows, I have a dollar-for-dollar match system where I've tried to, we've done custodial accounts for the girls. I've got a custodial Roth account for my daughter's wages and earnings that she's had. And we try to really encourage her to save for the future. And the big part of this is I want her to learn independence. I want her to learn to stand on her own, to understand the power of saving, of giving, all good money management skills. Because, look, I think that if you ask what wealthy families worry about, because they know this churning of wealth creation occurs, a lot of them are worried about screwing the kids up. Right. And to the point that, and look, some of this is, and I've seen it with when I was growing up, a number of my friends did get gifts as they became adults. They got gifts annually from their parents, well-intentioned, but if they're not structured right, you might actually be creating dependency on the money from the parents, or you could be in a worse situation. What if your adult children don't become self-sustaining, they could drain you dry with all their lifestyle needs themselves. And this is talked about in The Millionaire Next Door.
Yeah, in Dr. Stanley's book, he says more than 46% of the affluent in America give at least $15,000 worth of economic outpatient care, that's giving money to kids, to their adult children and or grandchildren. And I find that alarming. Now, it's one thing if that's part of like an estate plan. It's one thing if that's part of like some strategy there. But I'm like you, Brian. I had a couple of friends who I grew up with that were getting those gifts, that they were receiving that money that was coming in. This is a bad, they didn't have the same kind of drive that I had. They didn't have the same kind of desire to go out there and make wise financial decisions and stand on their own. And I wonder if part of it is because they knew they always had the safety net in the background.
Well, that's just something we know. The first generation didn't get these gifts.
That's right.
So if they didn't give that, but then the second and third generation are getting these gifts, instead of them building a budget without the $15,000, they're building a budget with the $15,000. And what that's doing is encouraging excess consumption. It's encouraging, hey, why do I have to worry about being a saver when I can just be a spender? I don't need to save. I got this legacy money coming my way. The mentality kind of gets distorted, and that's how you get into these type of situations. So just be careful. Look, there's nothing wrong with having success. There's nothing wrong with paying it forward. I'm just saying try to do it in a positive way so that hopefully your children are using it as a building situation, not as a subsidy situation, and then you're part of that 70 and 90% wealth cleansing process that occurs in the statistics.
So we've talked about you want to create and stress test a great retirement plan. You want to watch out for lifestyle creep. You want to have a healthy relationship with debt. And you want to teach your kids about smart financial principles. Well, another way that we think that you can protect your wealth is oftentimes when the gravity of your financial circumstance becomes so great, or the complexity of your situation gets too big, or maybe just your time, your ability to keep it all on track becomes overwhelming. We think that it's not crazy to think about getting a co-pilot.
Yeah, I mean, this is something because it hasn't come up in this step 4 of actually the wealth protection things, but it did come up under 3, is we see it all the time. People will come to us super successful, and they go, guys, I'm worried about my blind spots.
Yep.
I'm worried I don't have enough time. And then truthfully, I'm worried I'm going to make some knuckleheaded mistake with taking on too much risk after I've won the game, that this thing blows up. And that is a true problem. I've seen it so many times when you talk about how is wealth lost. There is not an investment game that is worth you losing at all. And that's where I think people really don't have a healthy understanding of the balance of risk-adjusted returns. And that's why when people come to us, I love the fact that we get to do asset allocation that's risk-adjusted based upon their specific goals, their age, their risk profile. We also get to work on tax location. I mean, these are the type of things you just don't know what you don't know, and it's great to have a co-pilot that kind of works you through those things.
One of the things I love, Brian, is you started the show talking about there's a skill set. There's like these 2 distinct skill sets. There's a skill set in terms of building and accumulating wealth, and there's a secondary skill set in maintaining that wealth. What I think is really interesting, and we see this all the time, we talk to like wonderfully financially successful folks who've done a great job building and growing and adding and taking on risk and getting to the point that they are at financial independence. But we know there's a psychological shift that happens when you go from working with your brain and your back and your hands and your feet to go create wealth, and then having to count on your army of dollar bills to generate wealth for you, to create income for you. That's a difficult thing no matter who you are, no matter what stage of life you are. There is going to be that psychological shift. And I can't tell you how many times I've had the conversation with a client, especially like 2020 is a great example. I have a lot of folks who retired at the end of 2019, the beginning of 2020, and had to say, hey, it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
The plan that you had in place was good before the pandemic. It's good during the pandemic. And now, as we're about a year removed from the beginning of it, the plan is still good. And they've said to me, I'm so glad I had you to talk me off the ledge. I'm so glad that I had a voice of reason, someone who's been here before, done this before, could give me that insight. I think that's one of the great things that a co-pilot can do for you, is help protect you from yourself, because the psychology of wealth changes as your financial circumstances
Think about
change.
it. Going from a saver to becoming a spender, you've spent 40 years building. There's going to be some insecurity, some worry, because it's not a skill set you're used to, on how you do start spending
right.
without the guilt and do it well where you're not taking on too much risk or screwing up the asset allocation. That's where we step in. And that's kind of also, I always like to close out kind of with the abundance cycle too, because a lot of people, you're probably brand new. We're still at the beginning of a brand new year where people are just discovering us. We've reached a level of size now that I think people will see and go, wow, they have 6 figures of followers. You know, there must be something here. You're probably wondering what the catch is, and there is no catch. I mean, we love on you. We give you tons of free advice because that is the abundance cycle. I want you to come in here. We're going to invest on you for years. I mean, we're going to love on you, give you this. But my goal is, because I've been doing this since 2006, me and Bo have been decades of just loving on you with free information. The payback is you're going to reach that level of success that you do reach the co-pilot status, that you just don't know what you don't know. And you're going to say, hey, I'm going to remember who planted those seeds. I came with nothing. I learned, applied, and grew this to the level of success that I now need that co-pilot. Those guys talked about it years ago. We'll still be here. I mean, this is the great thing about just being generous, giving it away, is that we just, you know, we're paid. It's kind of paid forward for us just by your success, and we love that.
Now, if you're someone who maybe you're not quite at that graduation point, you're not quite ready to take the relationship to the next level, it's okay. We have tons of free resources for you as well. Go out to our website, moneyguy.com/resources. You can go out there and see all the free deliverables, all the free handouts, all the free PDFs that we make available to you so that you can begin to take your finances to the next level.
Guys, thanks so much. Also, I'd be horrible if we didn't ask. Make sure you subscribe.
Yep.
You know, give us feedback. You can always go to the website, moneyguy.com. Go get the free deliverables, moneyguy.com/resources. They literally are free, asking you to take advantage of them. Don't miss out. I'm your host, Brian Preston, Mr. Bo Hansen. Money Guy team, out.